And today I'm here with, I'm lucky enough actually to be here with someone I consider to be a dear friend and a mentor to me since I've been with the firm that we work at together. This is Mark Smalley. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And we're going to start out, today we're going to talk about leadership. And the first question I want to ask you is, how would you describe your leadership style?
That's a good question. When I think about my leadership style, I probably say balance is the best way that I like to look at it. Golden rule kind of pops out there. Like I always like to get treated the same way that I treat others and whatnot. But there's always got to be a great level of balance for what we do as leaders. Like I love making emotional connections with my direct reports and trying to get the most out of them. But it's always a nice, delicate balancing act, right? Especially when we're dealing with like some top performers, some folks that need a little bit of a room for
Hmm.
improvement, folks that are like that movable middle. So I always like to take an approach of figuring out what makes all of my direct reports kind of tick, and then give them the support and give them the inspiration that they need to be the best that they can.
I know you love being a leader. And so I want to know sort of what do you find the most like life giving out of leadership or the most fun out of leadership?
Gotcha. It's actually sitting right next to me. What really warms my heart from a leadership standpoint is when I get to tell the story of folks that came into the industry completely unlicensed or folks with transferable skills that were doing something a little bit different. I have a hospitality background too. That's probably
Hmm.
why you and I get along so well. I love it when my folks are able to elevate themselves. And sometimes it could be as simple as like, hey, I got all my licenses. That's great. Hey, I got my first promotion. One of these days I'm going to be super happy when you're running an elite team
Hmm.
and I'm interviewing for a job on your team. That's the type of things that I really like getting
Wow.
out of leadership is seeing the success for the folks that have had a chance to work with me.
So then what do you find to be the most challenging part?
I would say the most challenging part is trying to motivate folks when they are going through a little bit of a rough patch. And what's very hard to gauge as a leader is trying to figure out whether it's, hey, do they need more support? Are they trying, or have they completely given up on me? And that's kind of hard to figure out. And the way that I've always looked at it is if someone has room for improvement and they're trying, I'm going to give them all the support that they need. However, if they're not trying, I'm going to try to find other ways to motivate them. But that's what can be really challenging for a leader when we're developing a lot of our leadership capital towards folks that might not necessarily be trying too much, and it's tough to figure that out sometimes.
So another thing I know that's very important to you is culture.
Yes, yes.
And so what would you describe as your ideal work culture for your team?
Oh man, I think back to some of the times when I first started in the industry, and I worked for an amazing leader that around the office was affectionately known as Fezziwig, and it wasn't just for the awesome holiday parties. It was that care, it was that compassion, and and I've always tried to like emulate that type of thing and lead with in that type of manner. I don't necessarily want to be friends with everybody,
Mhm.
but I want to make sure that like I'm kind of viewed as like, hey, here's someone who's willing to give time, give effort, make me better. That's really what I think about from that standpoint. But yeah, I've always been inspired by some of my great leaders, and I always kind of ask that of my direct reports too, like, hey, have an open mind, right? Like let your leader inspire you, or step outside of your comfort zone a little bit and try something different and just see how it works.
So following along that same line, what are some successful strategy or some strategies you found are successful for improving team morale?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Especially when I look at the type of industry that we're in, and I see all that red on the board after quarter one. That could definitely lead to an awful lot of challenging conversations with clients. What we do can be very emotional. We're dealing with people's money, and that can be very, very difficult. And when we see stuff like this, I think having open communication and letting folks know that, like, hey, we're here to support you. We're here to give you everything that you need to be successful. There's going to be times when it's going to get rough out there, but we'll do what we can to like reframe our thought process, or just put in like a little bit of extra effort and grasp onto that. Maybe there's just a little bit of positivity in there, but just grasp onto that and try to magnify it. And the best thing is that tomorrow always brings a fresh day. So there's always a chance to kind of learn from your mistakes and start fresh. I'm real big on learning from mistakes. Like if people ask me like, hey, what's my secret to success? I've made a lot of mistakes. And it's not just messing up. It's having that ability of being able to go back and reflect and make positive changes. And like when morale's low, that's like kind of along those same lines. What we're looking to do is we're looking to have people stay motivated, get more motivated, and whatever piece that I can help them kind of focus on to make that better, I want to make sure that they're aware of that. One of the things that comes to mind too is like when we think about like those negative thought pattern cycles, like it's very easy to go down that path. It's like, hey, I'm losing money, or hey, I'm not going to be able to afford that lifestyle that I want. Like those are really, really tough conversations. But if we think about it logically, where it's like, hey, maybe I made a mistake. What's my plan for corrective action? And how am I going to turn it around in the future? That's what's going to make us all better. When we do our orientation days, and some of our new folks ask, like, "Hey, what's one leadership skill that you can share?" I think I always say something along the lines of like, "Hey, don't be afraid to make a mistake. You can make the mistakes. Not too many, but like you can make the mistakes. But as long as we're looking back and reflecting on them, that can be a very powerful learning tool."
So we've gone over, I think, what you and I agree both feel like is kind of like the most important things is, our employee morale and making sure our team is cohesive and that sort of thing. Now let's get into the sort of numbers type of thing, performance.
Mhm.
What sort of strategies do you find to be the best way to drive individual performance for your associates?
Yeah, great question. I think it all comes down to setting proper expectations, and everybody knows what's important, to the goal, the overall goal. And sometimes we can get lost a little bit in the minutia of the numbers because there's a lot of them. We do work in a call center type of environment. Everything is recorded and tracked and monitored. And in that instance, that's kind of where big data doesn't really help us all that much, because if we have too many data points and we have too many metrics, there's going to be confusion for the folks that are looking to perform. And if they don't know what's expected of them, and they don't know what they need to do on the daily, they might grasp onto something that they deem important, but in reality it might not necessarily be that important. And that can kind of go into like that negative loop where it's like, hey, I'm a direct report, but I'm not getting the proper direction that I need. So I'm doing all these things that I think is right, but it might not necessarily be right. And then there could be frustration on their part when I try to take corrective action. And we never want to go down that path, right? Like we want to go down the path of like, hey, here's the expectations, here's the goals. There's not too many of them. I think in our world we're really only responsible for two or three top metrics, so we like to keep it relatively simple. Um, if they can grasp that and they kind of understand what they need to do, then we can point them in the right direction. That helps for the folks that have that opportunity for improvement too. If they don't know what the goal is and they're missing it, and then I kind of come back at them and I'm like, hey, we're supposed to be doing this. This is the goal. That could be a little bit of an awkward conversation versus like, hey, here's clear cut what you need to do. Here's some examples of how you can do it. Here's a plan. Here's a way for you to reflect and build. And then let's repeat that on the daily. And typically that works.
When interviewing, so we're kind of taking another shifting another gear here.
Mhm.
When interviewing, do you ask questions about personality type, or to try to figure out how if they fit the position?
I do. I do. I mean, we all do. Like because we're blessed by a huge organization, of a lot of those behavioral questions are all kind of built out for me. So that's pretty nice. But that said, everybody is unique. And I never really know who's going to be best at their role. And we talked a little bit about transferable skill. The folks that tend to excel in our role usually have varied backgrounds. And some of the more common ones that I look at are like folks that were in hospitality and were client facing and they're good communicators. I don't think I typically hire folks with finance degrees,
Mm-hmm.
even though we work in finance. Like I'm looking for good communicators. I'm looking for people that are naturally curious. They're not afraid to ask questions. And I'm looking for people that kind of have that confident ability to learn and actively listen, but then they're also able to present solutions that can ultimately help our clients. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. So I keep a very open mind. I don't necessarily ask like anything too tricky or anything too Freudian. I just want to have a conversation and learn a bit more about them and to try to get an idea of like, hey, are they able to do this job and are they able to do this job well? And if they're not able to do this job right off the get-go, can I detect that will to get a little bit better?
And then finally, to bring it back full circle, how often or what is your feedback cadence like for you and your associates?
Different for everybody. I like to keep it pretty unique. So, like for my newer folks, maybe we'll have daily connects, right, or daily reflections, right, or I would say at a minimum weekly.
Mhm.
Just making sure that they're comfortable in what they're doing, they understand the aspect, and then we've got a feedback loop with it. Um, for the more tenured folks, maybe once every couple of weeks. Like more senior folks, maybe once a month. But always want to have regular connects, and also make sure that when we have those regular conversations, when we're resetting expectations or revisiting goals, I always like to go back and inspect. Not like a week later, not a month
Mhm.
later, but I'll always inspect like just a couple of days later just to see like, all right, hey, like we adopted something new. We talked about this new strategy. We talked about this new plan. Like, let's go at it. If they're not doing it 2 days later, they're not going to be doing it the next week. They're not
Absolutely.
going to be doing it the next month. So I always want to make sure that like setting proper expectations, have that feedback loop in there, wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to let you know I'm very grateful for you taking your time with me today, and I'm grateful for your partnership. In the time that we've worked together.
Excellent, excellent. This has been great, Dustin. Like, I'm really happy for you. I hope your professor agrees.
All
And yeah, look forward to doing something like this again in the future.
right, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.